How's it going, world? So, my name is Kevin DeSilva, Professor McGuire. How's it going today? This is my video blog response in regards to our first essay. So, the first thing that I want to outline and make clear is that nowadays the world is completely different than what it used to be, say, 20, 30, 50 years ago. Plain and simple. Technologies change, people change, industries change, market trends change. Everything is a continuous, ongoing process of change. So what we need to do as humans is adapt to change, create new technologies to deal with such change, and thus we have now become an information society. So for example, I'm talking to you on a webcam. At the same time, I have my cell phone right beside me. I've got my tablet in hand. 10 years ago, neither one of these things would be common to be having within a regular conversation, or a simple blog on the internet for that matter would not even exist. So as things have changed, as cultures change, we've created means to control culture and control the new technologies that have come from there, so that the power does reside within the hands of a few to control the many. The first thing that we want to outline is a process called bureaucracy. Now, bureaucracy originates back in the 19th century. It goes as far back as incorporating abstract rules for the division of labor and has hierarchical authority. So if we think about any bureaucratic institutions, it's all about power struggles. So we're thinking school, right? It would be a teacher versus a student. A student does not have the hierarchy to tell this teacher what to do. However, if the teacher tells you what to do as a student, you are obliged to listen, because that's the way that the power struggle is related. Likewise, through bureaucracy, there's also certain chains of command. Originally, back in the 1830s, America had a national bank, and it consisted of three individuals who ran the entire banking organization. However, over time, 50 years later, there was 13,000 different federal government employees that would be managing that national system. It's insane how things have changed. However, at the end of the day, the power is still in the hands of very few. If you look at the Canadian system, the American political system, there's one president, one prime minister. Sure, you have your full cabinet, but at the end of the day, you have that one individual who has the entire power. So, bureaucracy, the reason bureaucracy happened was first and foremost the shift from an agricultural society towards an industrial society. This shift is significant because that change in culture completely called for reform in the way that we do things and the way that we live our lives on a regular basis. So, with the Industrial Revolution, essentially, there was all kinds of changes that went into place. First off, it took place between 1750 and 1850, roughly, and there was different increases and changes in agriculture, manufacturing, mining, transportation, and of course, technology in a nutshell. These things range from steam-powered engines to machine tools. So steam power, we're talking trains, or use of water vapor to create movement. Of course, machine tools would be like the water wheel for textile production. We had the first time that men went from working in the farms towards working in the city. Likewise, people were now working, of course, from farming. Working in the city meant factory work. And being part of a factory, being a certain number within that hierarchy, means you were exiled and isolated from your final product. We became numbers and no longer people, which kind of plays on Foucault's wording of a government of men to an administration of things. We went from face-to-face communication to faceless communication with corporations. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, in the words of James Bender, mass production and distribution as a result of industrialization meant that there had to be a recognition of communication and information processing to deal with the ever-expanding markets. Essentially, as markets got bigger and bigger, and as we created new technologies, we needed to have ways to deal and control these technologies to ensure the entire betterment of mankind. A perfect example is the new creation of course, those steam-powered engines. Now, they're great. I mean, we can move faster, things can travel faster, there's absolutely no issue. However, by creating these steam-powered trains, we didn't realize the difference within time zones at the time. Likewise, there was no means of communication. It was pre-established. At this day and age, we all know that trains never come on time for the most part. So what the operators used to do would have to rely on pre-established communication to ensure that there wouldn't be any accidents. Of course, that never happened. There was a lot of accidents. Lots of people died. And it was incredibly expensive to keep on replacing these trains. So communication methods had to be developed to ensure that we can guarantee the success of our technologies as well as remove and significantly reduce the fatalities associated with these new technologies. So, what we ended up doing was, of course, implementing bureaucracy and rationalization, decreasing the information so it could be processed and things became a lot more, impersonal. People became numbers, right? So by removing the individual, right, everyone was isolated and there was plenty of discrepancies around that as well. We didn't feel as successful as people. We felt like there was something lacking as well. This change in society from agriculture to industrial meant that there was now a creation of something called leisure time. We could now see the division between farming, which was considered work, play, and a job all at the same time, right? You wouldn't need to leave the farm to go find your fun because it was all in it. You worked to live. However, now with the shift of industrial culture, the shift of people from the farmlands towards the cities, now there was a creation of leisure time and everything ended up changing. The way we perceive life, the way that we live our lives, and the way we know it completely altered. So the real question is, first and foremost, what did we develop to take control of this control crisis? Well, it's quite simple. The telegraph. Now, the telegraph had a whole bunch of firsts. Before the telegraph, information, such as me or you communicating or a letter being sent, relied on the same speed of its vehicle. So, for example, face to face is face to face communication. However, if I wanted to send a letter, my letter would depend on the mail delivery system, on the train schedule, on the horse system, whichever system it was then. So back then with steam trains, for example, the, when the train left, if my letter wasn't there, well, I would have to wait until the next train to deliver that message because we were limited to the speed of the technologies that were carrying them. Thus, what ended up happening was the telegraph completely re-altered the way that we live our lives because of that. It was the first means that we were able to remove communication from the physical mode of transportation. We were now able to communicate faster than we moved physically. Right? Messages became separate from the physical objects and allowed physical control physical processes actively. First, the telegraph was also the first communication technology with a fixed physical infrastructure, with the network. It was the first technology, communication tech, to annihilate space and time. That annihilation of space and time eradicated space and time. In other words, I could have a conversation with my friend living 10 miles away, and it wouldn't seem like there was any space or time between us because we're living in real time. It also was the first technology to employ electricity, and of course, we use it to find a solution to our train problems by using rail switching, by communicating so that they could switch the rails and avoid future accidents with all our train reps. Now, a good analogy of what the telegraph was to what we consider the internet today, well, the telegraph was the Victorian internet age. People fell in love over the phone. You didn't need to see their faces anymore. Likewise, this was obviously the first time that there was hackers. Hackers used to tap in, climb on telephone poles, work all the way up to the top there, cut into the wire, and then tap in so they can hear the conversation. This was a whole new world and way to live things. Of course, when telephone lines started coming out and voices started to be heard, women would be on the voice phones a lot more because their higher pitch in their voice could be transferred better over the frequency airwaves. So men started falling with love with women over the phone. It was almost like internet dating all over again. Anyone heard of Lava Life? No, not going there. Just joking. Anyways, the telegraph also had a couple other significant roles. First off, the role in the press. Well, in regards to the press, news took a long time to arrive. I mean, if you're thinking back towards imperialism and stuff like that, when the British colonized, how do they get the information across? How do they make sure that they were on the same page? When they were going to India, all these other countries, how do they ensure that what they wanted would be the same news that they would eventually get? Because it would take as long as transportation. So if we're talking across seas, well, it would take months, months and months, and by that point, it was outdated. What was the point of even getting it? So with the telegraph, it completely changed that process. Now, as technology evolved, there was a creation of something called the penny papers, so it was incredibly cheap to actually print the papers, and thus it created, with the telegraph, a systematic cooperative news gathering. The influence of the telegraph in journalism was one of equalization. Now, the people can go out and get the news, similar to us calling 680 News or something like that, and deliver the news to the source. So now, the source ended up bringing in all the news and then would define what was important and provide that to the viewers. So it empowered us in a sense by letting us go out and seek that news and of course let them know about it. Likewise, the telegraph had a lot of religious discourses. It's interesting to note that the first ever sentence said by the telegraph was, "Oh God, what hath we wrought?" That's what it was. "Oh God, what hath we wrought?" It was the first ever message done by the telegraph. Now, the reason it had religious discourse is because in the book of Job, 38, verse 35, "Canst thou send lightning that they may go and say unto thee, Here we are." Lightning, electricity. Harnessing electricity for the use of technology was a huge breakthrough for Christianity and for technology as a whole. But what it did was it basically created a discourse that religious individuals believed that this was God's hand doing God's work because it was harnessing something from the heavens, electricity, into something that we can use to communicate. This also helped build, unfortunately, empires and imperialism as well. The perfect example is my last name. I'm Kevin De Silva. De Silva is a Portuguese last name, and I'm born and raised. Sorry, I'm born here, but my parents are from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is underneath India, and the only reason I got my last name to be a Portuguese last name is because they colonized us. But they colonized us after the English came. So what's really interesting about that is they set the foundation, and by them setting the foundation, creating these lines of communication, they were able to relay the information back and forth between Sri Lanka and England, so that way they can keep our, continue to keep us, our culture secluded, or whatever they were doing back then. But at the same time, it brought in new lights, right? It brought in the Portuguese to come in and then once again colonize us. And with this communication technologies, they were able to establish and hold the ranks. Not until later on, much later on, were we freed of that. Only recently, Sri Lanka changed its name from Ceylon to Sri Lanka. And the reason is because it was our independence from the British Empire. But how did the British dominate and maintain their power? Simply through the telegraph. To make sure that what they were doing were the same views of what everyone up in England were doing. Right? Maintaining that communication and that flow of the same message. Now, the telegraph was of course huge for capitalists as well. It was of course the first ever monopoly that was founded. Plain and simple, Western Union was the first monopoly. The irony with that, of course, is the fact that the creator of the telegraph, Morse, pitched the idea to the government saying, "Hey, I got a telegraph. Do you want it?" And the government said, "No." A couple years later, 20 years later, the biggest monopoly gets created. The government says, "Yes." But too late. So, long story short, it made a lot of issues because since there was a monopoly, it, just like any monopoly in any market, it excludes other companies from coming in, starting their company, delivering their goods, creating that equal flow. Instead, if you didn't deal with Western Union and if you weren't paying their fees, well, it got costly and you couldn't deal with it. You couldn't continue your business. If you were a new company trying to make your way in, unless you got bought over by Western Union, there was no chance for you. This first monopoly was the fault of the government. The government eventually did adopt the telegraph, but the damage had already been done in terms of the way it was commercially treated. Now, the good news, though, is with the telegraph, it stopped things such as arbitrage trading. right? Arbitrage trading was when you would live in Cincinnati, and if someone would be in, let's say, St. Louis, I might charge you $3 for beef in Cincinnati because I got a lot of cattle. But because there's none in St. Louis, if I have the means to travel my product all the way to St. Louis, I'm going to charge you $9 for it. Actually, I'm going to charge you $12. I can charge you whatever I like because I know you don't have it, and because I have the means to get it to you, I'm going to create arbitrage and trade at a higher expense towards you. So you have no choice but to pay. But now with the telegraph, our communication lines were